The Waterford crystal chandelier cast a galaxy of fractured light across the ballroom, glinting off pearls and diamond studs, shimmering on the silk of my daughter's wedding gown. From my table in the back, a position of my own choosing, I watched her. Clara. My beautiful, ambitious, ruthless daughter. She was holding a champagne flute, her laughter a bright, tinkling sound that didn't quite reach her eyes. The man beside her, her new husband Julian Covington, beamed, oblivious. His father, Arthur Covington, a man of sculpted silver hair and a tailored suit that cost more than my first car, was making a toast. Everything was perfect. Exactly as I had planned. I dabbed the corner of my mouth with a linen napkin, my heart a slow, steady drum against my ribs. It had been 25 years since I'd felt anything other than the cold, patient hum of purpose. Tonight, something else flickered, a ghost of maternal pride, quickly extinguished by the fire of what was to come. I picked up my fork and took a small, deliberate bite of the lemon dill salmon. It was exquisite. Of course it was. I had approved the menu myself. Clara finished her round of greetings and her gaze swept the room, finally landing on me. A frown, delicate and fleeting, marred her perfect brow. She whispered something to Julian, then began weaving her way through the tables, a graceful ship navigating a sea of opulence. My opulence. Mother, she said, her voice a low, clipped hiss as she reached my table. What are you doing? I'm enjoying the meal, dear, I said, offering a placid smile. It's delicious. You're having a second helping. She didn't look at me, but at the plate, her lip curled in a way that reminded me so much of her father in his final, bitter days. It's a party, Clara. One is allowed to indulge. This isn't some back-alley buffet, Mother. This is my wedding. The Covingtons are watching. Everyone is watching. You're embarrassing me. Her eyes, my eyes, flashed with a hard, cruel light. For God's sake, have some self-control. You look like a fat pig at a trough. The words struck me, not with the pain she intended, but with a strange, clinical satisfaction. The final piece of the puzzle, clicking into place. I had wondered if she had it in her, that casual, unthinking cruelty. She did. The confirmation was clarifying. I set my fork down slowly, the clink of silver on porcelain a tiny, sharp sound in the general hum of the reception. I see, I said softly. My quiet acceptance seemed to enrage her more than any argument would have. You see? Is that all you have to say? I spend years cultivating this, building a life for myself, and you show up looking like you. And you can't even be bothered to pretend you belong here. I finally looked up, meeting her gaze. Oh, but I do belong here, Clara. More than anyone else. A commotion at the head table drew our attention. Arthur Covington had finished his toast and was now looking our way, his polite smile frozen on his face. He squinted, took a step forward, and his jaw went slack. The wine glass in his hand tilted, spilling a ruby-red stain on the pristine white tablecloth. His face, tanned and healthy only moments before, had turned the color of ash. He wasn't looking at his son or my daughter. He was staring directly at me. At the 67-year-old grandmother in the simple, dove-gray dress, the woman his new daughter-in-law had just called a fat pig. And in his eyes I saw not confusion, but the dawning, soul-shattering horror of a man seeing a ghost. A ghost he thought he'd buried 3 decades ago. He knew exactly who I was. And in that moment, Arthur Covington understood that the wedding wasn't an ending. It was an execution. The transition from Eleanor Vance, the fearsome architect of corporate revenge, to Ellie, the soft, unassuming grandmother, had been the work of a lifetime. The first layer was physical. After I sold the last of my holdings, I allowed the sharp, angular frame that had carried me through countless boardrooms to soften. I stopped the punishing 5 a.m. gym sessions. I let my hair, once a severe, steel-gray bob, grow out into a gentle, cloud-like frame around my face. I swapped power suits for comfortable cardigans and sensible shoes. I cultivated a slight stoop, the quiet shuffle of a woman whose world had shrunk to her garden, her baking, and her beloved daughter. The second layer was psychological. I learned to speak more slowly, to let my sentences trail off. I perfected a slightly bewildered look for when conversations turned to finance or technology. I bought a small, unassuming house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, miles and a universe away from the penthouse apartment that once overlooked the city's skyline. The penthouse I had long since sold. In this house, I baked. I baked oatmeal cookies and lemon meringue pies and rich, dark chocolate cakes. The aroma of sugar and butter became my camouflage. People saw Ellie, with her flour-dusted apron and her ready smile, and they saw a woman who was simple, kind, and utterly harmless. No one, least of all my daughter Clara, knew about the woman I had been. They didn't know about the empire I had built from the ashes of a life Arthur Covington had torched. It began with my husband, David. He was a brilliant, trusting man, an engineer with a mind like a diamond, able to see the complex facets of any problem. Arthur Covington was his business partner, his friend. David was the genius, Arthur was the face, the charmer with the easy smile and the network of connections. Together, they built Covington and Vance Innovations, a small tech firm with a revolutionary patent that was poised to change data encryption forever. And Arthur, my David's best friend, stole it all. He systematically falsified records, created dummy corporations, and siphoned funds. He engineered a crisis, then convinced a distraught David to sign over his shares for a pittance to a third-party investor who would supposedly save the company. That investor, of course, was a shell corporation owned by Arthur himself. By the time David realized what had happened, it was too late. He was broke, professionally ruined, and legally outmaneuvered. The betrayal shattered him. Not the loss of money, but the loss of faith. He spiraled. He drank. He faded. A year later, a man who had once been a titan of intellect and optimism was gone, dead from a heart attack at 45. The doctors called it stress. I called it murder. I was left with a 9-year-old daughter, a mountain of debt, and a rage so pure and so cold it could have frozen the sun. At David's funeral, Arthur had the gall to show up. He placed a hand on my shoulder, his face a mask of sorrow, and offered his condolences. He told me David was a great man, but just wasn't cut out for the pressures of business. Looking into his sympathetic eyes, I didn't see a friend. I saw a predator, licking his lips after a kill. And in that moment, I made a vow on my husband's grave. I would not mourn. I would become a monument to his memory, and I would tear Arthur Covington's world down to the studs, salt the earth where it stood, and make him wish he had never been born. Clara knew none of this. I told her her father died of a weak heart, and that his business had failed. I wanted to protect her from the poison of that story. And a colder, more honest part of me knew that my vengeance required a clean slate. I needed her to grow up unburdened by my past. I took what little money we had left, went back to school, and got a degree in finance. I worked 3 jobs, my grief and fury fueling me through sleepless nights. I didn't sleep, I calculated. I didn't eat, I strategized. My first move was small. I used my knowledge of the markets to turn a few $1,000s into 10. Then 10 into 50. I lived like a pauper, pouring every cent back into my growing war chest. I called myself the an anonymous trader whose instincts became the stuff of whispers on Wall Street. Over years, whispers became legend. I founded a small consulting firm under a different name, offering discreet financial restructuring services. My clients were companies on the brink of collapse. I didn't save them. I dissected them, sold them for parts, and took my fee, learning every dirty trick, every loophole, every secret passageway in the world of corporate finance. All the while, I watched Covington & Sons, he'd erased David's name from the company he'd stolen, grow into a global conglomerate. I tracked Arthur's every move, his acquisitions, his board members, his personal investments. I built a dossier on him that would have made the CIA blush. I hired a private investigator, a former intelligence operative named Marcus, a quiet, severe man who communicated in clipped sentences and shared my appreciation for patience. He became my confidant, my strategist, and the only other person on Earth who knew the truth. As my own wealth grew into the stratosphere, I began my attack. It was a war of 1,000 cuts, waged from the shadows over the course of a decade. I funded a rival tech company that poached his best engineers. I used shell corporations to short his stock at strategically vulnerable moments. I bought the debt of his suppliers and called it in at the worst possible times. I anonymously fed tips to financial journalists about instability within his logistics chains. Arthur never saw the single enemy orchestrating his demise. He saw bad luck, a turn in the market, betrayals from his underlings, the relentless pressure of competition. He grew paranoid, angry, firing loyal executives and making rash decisions. His empire, built on a foundation of theft, began to crumble. The final piece of my plan was Clara. I guided her, subtly but surely. I paid for the best schools, knowing the circles she would enter. When she expressed an interest in art history, I discovered an obscure but prestigious internship at a gallery in the city. A gallery that just happened to be chaired by Julian Covington's aunt. I watched their courtship from a distance, through Marcus's discreet reports. I saw them fall in love, a genuine affection that was both a triumph of my planning and a source of a strange, hollow ache in my chest. Clara was a pawn in my game, and I knew it. But the part of me that was a mother whispered that I was giving her a life of comfort and security she could never have dreamed of. The part of me that was an avenger knew I was delivering Arthur Covington's own son to the slaughter. When the time was right, as Covington and Sons teetered on the brink of bankruptcy, Marcus made the offer. A silent, anonymous benefactor, Vance Holdings, a name I chose for David, was willing to acquire the company, save the jobs, and allow Arthur to retire with a sliver of his dignity and a generous, but not obscene, severance package. Arthur, broken and exhausted, agreed. He signed the papers, transferring the last remnants of his stolen legacy into the hands of his greatest enemy. He had no idea he was selling his soul back to the woman whose life he had destroyed. I dismantled the company from the inside out, absorbing its valuable assets into my own network and quietly liquidating the rest. And I held on to one last piece, the Covington family's lavish estate, the one where tonight's wedding was being held. I owned it all. The roof over their heads, the ground beneath their feet, the very air they were breathing. And now, here we were. All the threads, pulled taut over 30 years, converging in this single, glittering room. Clara's cruel words were the catalyst. Arthur's shocked recognition was the beginning of the end. My measured narrative was over. It was time for the final act. The blood drained from Arthur's face. He stumbled back, bumping into a table. A waiter rushed to steady him. The jovial atmosphere in the ballroom faltered, conversations sputtering out as people turned to stare. Julian hurried to his father's side. "Dad? What is it? Are you all right?" Arthur couldn't speak. He just pointed a trembling finger at me. "You," he croaked, his voice a dry rattle. "It can't be." Clara stared at him, then back at me, her face a mask of confusion and annoyance. "What is going on? Mother, what did you do?" I placed my napkin neatly beside my plate and rose to my feet. Every eye in the room was now on me. The soft, harmless grandmother was gone. As I walked towards the head table, the slight stoop in my shoulders straightened. My stride became purposeful, my gaze sharp and direct. It was as if decades were shedding from my skin, revealing the woman I had been forced to become. "Do," I said, my voice clear and carrying across the suddenly silent room. "I'm not doing anything, Clara. I'm just collecting on a debt." I reached the head table, my eyes locked on Arthur Covington. He was trembling, propped up by his son, a terrified animal caught in the headlights. "Eleanor," he whispered. "Eleanor Vance." A gasp rippled through the older guests who knew the name, the titans of industry who remembered the whisper of the ruthless trader E.V., the founder of Vance Holdings. Clara looked utterly baffled. "Vance? Like my father?" "Yes, dear," I said, turning to her. "Like your father. David Vance." A name this man, I gestured to Arthur, did his very best to erase from history. I walked over to the bandleader and took the microphone from his unresisting hand. A technician, one of Marcus's men who had replaced the wedding A/V crew that morning, gave me a subtle nod. The large projection screens on either side of the stage, which had been displaying a slideshow of the happy couple, flickered to life. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice amplified, calm, and utterly commanding. "I apologize for the interruption. My name is Eleanor Vance. Most of you know me simply as Clara's mother, a quiet widow. But some of you," my eyes scanned the crowd, landing on a few aging CEOs who now looked deeply uncomfortable, "may remember me differently." I turned my gaze back to Arthur. 30 years ago, my husband, David Vance, was the co-founder of a promising tech firm called Covington & Vance Innovations. He was the inventor of the core patent that made this man, Arthur Covington, everything he is. Or, rather, everything he was. On the screen, a document appeared, the original partnership agreement, David's signature beside Arthur's. Arthur here was my husband's best friend. His partner. David trusted him implicitly. And Arthur used that trust to systematically defraud him. He bled the company dry, funneled the profits into offshore accounts, and then, in an act of staggering cruelty, convinced a desperate David to sign away his entire life's work for pennies on the dollar. A new set of documents flashed on the screen: bank transfers, shell corporation registrations, evidence of wire fraud so clear and damning the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Arthur let out a choked sob. "The betrayal killed my husband," I continued, my voice even, devoid of the emotion that had fueled me for decades. "And it left me with a promise. A promise that I would see Arthur Covington lose everything he had ever built on my husband's grave." Clara was staring at me, her face pale with disbelief. "Mother, what are you saying?" "I'm saying, Clara, that your entire life has been a carefully constructed illusion. The schools you attended, the circles you moved in, your very meeting with Julian, all of it was arranged by me. Your relationship, this marriage, it is the capstone of my revenge." The horror on my daughter's face was a terrible thing to behold. Julian looked from the screen, to his father, to me, his handsome face contorted in a rictus of confusion and dawning agony. "For 15 years," I went on, the microphone cool and steady in my hand, "I have been the silent, unseen force dismantling the Covington empire. The hostile takeovers, the stock collapses, the bad luck, that was all me. And when the company was a hollow shell, I bought it. Vance Holdings, the anonymous entity that acquired Covington & Sons last year. That's my company. Built with my own 2 hands, in my husband's name." I let that sink in. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by Arthur's ragged breathing. "This house?" I said, with a slight sweep of my hand. "It's mine." "The catering?" "My compliments." "The wedding gift I gave you, Julian, the controlling interest in that newly merged venture? That venture is an empty shell. Its only asset is the colossal, multi-generational debt I have just finished transferring from your father's now-defunct corporate accounts into yours. Congratulations, son. You are now responsible for repaying every dollar your father ever stole." Julian staggered back as if I had physically struck him. Finally, I turned back to my daughter. The girl I loved and the girl I had used so terribly. Her eyes were wide with a mixture of terror and betrayal. "You called me a fat pig, Clara." "Because I was taking a second slice of salmon at a party I paid for, in a house I own, at a wedding I orchestrated to complete the utter destruction of the man whose family you so desperately wanted to impress. You were worried about appearances. About having some self-control. Well, I have been the picture of self-control for 30 years. This," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, "is what it looks like when I finally let go." I placed the microphone back on its stand with a soft click. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent ballroom. Marcus appeared at my side, a coat draped over his arm. I turned away from the tableau of ruin, from Arthur Covington, a crumpled, weeping old man, from Julian, his future obliterated before his eyes, from my daughter, Clara, her fairy tale wedding turned into a public vivisection. Her face was the last thing I saw, her mouth open in a silent scream, her eyes asking a question I could never answer. Marcus escorted me through the stunned crowd, who parted for us as if I were royalty, or perhaps the angel of death. We didn't look back. As we stepped out of the grand ballroom and into the cool, dark night, The faint sound of a woman beginning to sob reached my ears. I couldn't be sure if it was Clara. We walked down the long, gravel driveway towards a waiting town car, its engine purring softly in the darkness. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of night-blooming jasmine from the gardens I now owned. I stopped for a moment and looked up at the moon, a perfect silver disk in a starless sky. Marcus opened the car door for me. "Everything is in place, Eleanor," he said, his voice as neutral as ever. "The transfers are complete. The authorities will receive the anonymous tip regarding Mr. Cavington's initial fraud in the morning." "Good," I said, my own voice sounding hollow in my ears. I had done it. My vow was fulfilled. David was avenged. Every ghost was laid to rest, every debt paid in full. I had my pound of flesh, carved out with surgical precision. I had taken not just Arthur's money and his company, but his legacy, his son, his very name. I got into the car, the leather seat cool against my skin. As Marcus drove away from the magnificent estate, I looked back at the grand house, its windows blazing with light, a beautiful prison of my own design. Inside, lives were irrevocably shattered. A part of me, the part that had held on to rage for 3 decades, felt a grim, cold satisfaction. But as the lights of the party receded, becoming just another constellation in the dark, I was left with a silence that felt vast and terrifying. My life's great project was complete. I was 67 years old, I had infinite resources, and for the first time since my husband died, I had absolutely no idea what I was going to do tomorrow. The face of my heartbroken daughter was seared into my mind's eye, and I wondered, as we sped into the night, who the real ghost was in that room, and if, in my quest for vengeance, I had ended up burying myself.
My grandmother told me this story. Thanks for watching this video. Bye bye!